Hello everyone, this is an impressions video for Persona 5. First, my stats. I have played the game for over 37 hours due to having obtained an early copy. This video will have no spoilers and most footage will be of combat. Persona 5 tells the story of your protagonist. A student by day, but in the cognitive world is the thief codenamed Joker, who takes part in heists to steal the hearts of villains. Immediately, the game hits you with its aesthetic, which is supposed to reflect Joker and the Phantom Thieves' rebelliousness, and lives as stylish thieves. With black and white on bold crimson, text is displayed in off-kilter comic book boxes. The menu has Joker slamming his palm at the screen for a smash-mouth feeling. The opening features animation that skips frames, and during the game certain animations are sped up, giving the sense that every piece of art was well considered. The poses, little gestures such as Joker fixing his glove, slick sound effects, quick editing tricks, everything goes a long way to depict the image of the cool thief. The soundtrack uses a mix of acid jazz with movie heist or even Lupin III style music. I can't detail enough how perfect the atmosphere is, but I do admit that I wish it translated more into the anime cutscenes and 3D normal life portions of the game, which are more of the Atlas standard. If I had to describe Persona 5's appeal, it's translating that cool thief aesthetic into gameplay. You can watch the thieves plan as if they were strategizing how to obtain a huge score. The dungeons are contextualized as heists, like a big movie caper of a bank or museum. The walking speed is fast to fit your character. The game incorporates a simplified stealth system to ambush enemies, which is animated in such a style to make you feel like a quick-striking bandit. Whereas in other RPGs, preemptive strikes are a quality of life improvement, they're the lifeblood of this game. Enemies tend to hit very hard, and if you're ambushed, it can cost you dearly. Character builds have each character with their persona, a list of abilities related to their elemental affinity and weapon, with your main character being able to have multiple personas, which means you want him to cover a wide range of elemental attacks and support skills. The battle system itself has little that's new, but it does take old ideas and put a new spin on them. Combat uses a Super Mario RPG style interface rather than a scrolling menu, as this allows for speedy inputs. Elemental weaknesses, knocking down enemies, and finishing attacks are staple concepts. But here, elemental weaknesses always automatically knock down enemies. If you do this, you get to attack again. If you knock them all down, you perform a hold-up from which you can do an all-out attack, which nets you a cool finishing pose if you defeat all enemies. You're encouraged to do this because, again, enemies decimate your HP quickly, as if punishing you for not defeating them fast enough. The game is built for you to learn how to input this as fast as possible, giving it a character of its own and fitting in with the overall theming. It's not the most innovative combat system, but it's quite possibly the fastest, not counting RPGs that have a fast-forward function, of course. You can also use the hold-up to steal items, steal money, or convince the enemy to become a persona. I should also mention this game includes the Atlas staple of combining persona to make stronger ones, which is unfortunately the only real character building mechanic in this game outside of equipment. The appeal of this game is being able to continuously perform, blazing down a hallway, shooting into cover, ambushing an enemy, ending combat with haste. Rinse, wash, repeat, all in style. With that said, I do have some issues. First, movement can be cumbersome. After about 20 hours I did get used to it, but it never became completely comfortable. Since the game's gimmick is to feel like a cool thief, this kind of takes away from it. Even in the real life portion, it's obvious the game wants you to walk by, take in the rumors, like a thief blending in, but the awkward walking takes away from that feeling. Another issue is the janky cover system, which never feels quite right. The camera, while fine most of the time for dungeons, can sometimes get too close and too claustrophobic, and it screwed me over a few times in getting me ambushed. You also sometimes have to navigate tight, narrow hallways, and the movement and camera are not your friends in these situations sometimes. As for combat, while it's fun and accomplishes its goals, I do wonder if over time that outside of the more complicated and amazing boss battles, they could lose their novelty since you are performing a formula over and over again. 37 hours in, the game has at least began introducing enemies with no weaknesses into normal combat, but it doesn't do so much that it drastically alters the game. For me, the novelty is beginning to slightly wear thin, though I am still having fun. Persona 5 has much in common with Atlus's last big outing, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, something no reviewer I have seen has mentioned. It had fast-paced combat and tactics that relied on a formula, but it also built on its mechanics and added new ones on a consistent basis, while Persona 5 has only added one, in that your allies can randomly step in to deal a strong attack if Joker fails to kill an enemy. As a result, I do wonder how long the combat can keep up its appeal. I'm also noticing some reverse difficulty. The early game demanded SP to knock enemies down, and it really made you think about using the save room to leave the dungeon and resume from those checkpoints later on. But it's becoming less of a concern as time goes on. I'm also not even halfway into the game and have access to SP regenerating equipment, though I still would never say the game has ever become too simple. A bigger gripe that I have is with recruiting monsters, which involves dialogue trees that don't always have the clearest logic. Sometimes it feels like artificial difficulty, since if you fail, enemies will resume combat and get the jump on you. The dungeons once again remind me of Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which are really elaborate, lengthy, challenging areas that are all themed according to how a certain place appears in an alternate reality. Both manage to incorporate appropriate challenges such as security lasers and cameras, and both manage to integrate the narrative into the craziness, such as the dungeons being a surreal reflection of how that chapter's villain sees his world. Overall, this is a huge improvement for Persona, and I think both this game and TMS are equally good in what their dungeons were attempting to accomplish. But much of what you do is what Persona has become known for, which is living the high school life. The story is about a young teen wrongfully accused of a crime who is sent to live under probation in Tokyo. His new high school is the only one that will take him. He ends up in a complex web of events that lead him to gaining the power to steal the heart and effectively change the behavior of very bad people. But for most of your time, you go to class where you'll occasionally answer questions and take tests, build relationships with your friends known as confidants, which gives bonuses to combining Persona and to combat. You can eventually convince one of the girls in your group to become your girlfriend, and there are RPG social stats you can raise such as knowledge, kindness, and guts, which open up more social opportunities. The game functions on a day-to-day basis on a calendar, where you can do one activity in the day and one in the evening. You can see the hit movie The Cake Night Rises, get a job, read the books you buy, watch the DVDs you rent, or study, all of which can raise a social stat. Of course, your deadline for pulling off the next heist has a deadline, so it's all about time management. I always love the premise of Persona games, and this one where people in power have such strong dominance in the real world that a dungeon forms in an alternate dimension to reflect reality is no different. This combined with the overall aesthetic may make this the best executed of the modern Persona titles. As for the quality of writing, it depends on what you like. If you already love what this series offers, which have a well-written narrative and stories that can occasionally deal with realistic topics, including abuse, suicide, and cover-ups of scandals, this may be for you. While the overall concept of the game is oozing with originality, I never feel that the individual chapters are too different from anything I've seen before. And I never feel like the writing takes a unique direction that can blow me away. But it's still solidly written, and I will admit some of the emotional payoffs are good. However, I do have some harsh criticisms for the social confidants. The writing is good, but here's the thing. It has been 10 years since Persona 3 and 4, and there have been a ton of copycats that do the day, night, and social interaction model. But some of the copycats have improved various parts of the formula. For me, the bar has been raised when it comes to the level of writing. For example, The visual novel Danganronpa 2 back in 2010 really raised the quality for social interaction. I'm not saying Persona 5 social moments are bad, but they do feel standard. Some do stand out, I do like Ann's a lot, but most feel like mid to late 2000s level of dialogue. And the result is that they don't reach that level of depth that I'd like. As for the entire Persona model, some people complain there was a lack of depth in the activities in Persona 4. But for me, it was fine for the mid-2000s. But again, it's been 10 years since then and I think so much more can be done. More quality over quantity. Even if it means a shorter game, where activities feel more meaningful, rather than feeling like little time wasters or like I'm just clicking a few buttons for the sake of raising a social stat. Going back to writing, I think some editing can go a long way. I have no problem with a 100-hour RPG, which this is. But going through the dialogue, I can't help but noticing there are moments where the script could be made much tighter. I'm not asking for a shorter game, just one that's streamlined. This leads to how the game is paced. Between each day is a beautiful, slow, jazzy transition, read, load time screen, that goes from night to day. But I'm starting to get a little tired of how long it is. You are tutorialized intermittently for the first 5 to 10 hours. In an era where modern games have found ways to minimize this issue, the tutorials are spread out among multiple days when I wish they were included in a single day. As a result, the game often goes from night-day transition, tutorial, night-day transition. The game will often tell you of a new activity. You go through the night-day transition, awaiting the next day to try out that new activity. But then the next day a forced story event occurs, after which the game forces you to go to sleep once again and see the transition. By the way, I've missed my in-game due date for DVD rentals because of forced events. But at least they never seem to actually charge you. The game has you visit various portions of the first dungeon over 3 or 4 days, before it finally sets you free to explore. And I think the story definitely could have been tightened without losing any substance, and without making me see the night-day transition 4 times. Add to this the fact that activities can sometimes feel empty like I mentioned before, which sometimes make a day feel like you wake up to the night-day transition, you do what sometimes feels like meaningless button pressing to raise your social stats, before once again going to bed to see the night-day transition. Lastly, pile on all the other load screens and transitions and you really begin to feel all of that downtime. I don't mind a deliberately slow-paced RPG. Rather, this is a slowness that comes from how all of the above elements work in tandem to make Persona 5 feel oddly paced and slow in a bad way at times. If you fix the issues, you could have a tighter, more well-done slow-paced game. The more interesting part of the writing is the thematic focused on problems within Japanese culture. Japan has an honor-based society which has many benefits. But it has also been abused by people in high position, who are so respected that they can often feel above reproach. Additionally, while a healthy amount of shame is fine, the culture can take it to the extreme, with a shamed person looked at as having a ruined life. The protagonist, due to being on probation as well as the people he meets, find themselves ostracized and the subject of rumor, even though he and his friends have been wrongfully accused in one way or another. On the other hand, various figures of authority or power are seen as heroes, with their wrongdoings being covered up, such as an Olympic volleyball coach and teacher in the first chapter. Society in-game seems to have an abrasive attitude, one that feels like it was caused by a culture that inadvertently made it fine to look down on shame. Compare this to the West, where you're more likely to have media that views the teacher as the enemy. Additional issues can include, but are not limited to, how Japan feels about foreigners, as it's no accident that your first female party member is a quarter American blonde girl. Or there is how teenagers are expected to do well in high school or be considered useless, which is embodied in another party member. In my opinion, the game implements this with varying degrees of success, but never to a point that I ever feel like it fails. Though I do think there is the occasional moment where it feels more like a wish fulfillment fantasy rather than good social commentary. Persona 5 is a packed game, and even though I don't usually give numerical scores, if I had to quantify the game, it would be an 8 for me so far. I'm enjoying it, Otherwise, I wouldn't plan on going the full 100 to 120 hours to complete it. I don't regret being an early adopter for the game at all. I just think that the overall Persona model can definitely be updated and refined to become something that feels more up to date. If you are someone who loves Persona, you have probably already picked this up. If you have not, consider what your tastes are and perhaps this is or is not for you. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe and even like the video. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all.